Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. I'm Dele Adeshina, Managing Partner of Carrick Wealth here in Nigeria. I am pleased to be joined by my partners and colleagues from Morgan Oxford Education, Mr. Richard Morgan, the CEO, and Choma Anoye, who is the admissions manager for Morgan Oxford. Morgan Oxford are an education consultancy company based in the UK with offices right here in Nigeria, in Lagos and other parts of Nigeria, and even across other parts of Africa, in fact. Unfortunately, Linda Potikeri is unable to join us this morning, but she's a very integral part of the business. She was formerly head at British International School here in Lagos, as well as formerly head at Day Waterman College. So an experienced part of our organization, but unfortunately is unwell, and hopefully she'll be dialed in. Apologies for the late starting. I think we were due to start maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago. In true Nigerian fashion, I think we're still expecting a few people to jump on, but for those who are already on, we're glad to have you and we're keen to get on with it. So just to touch on what we're discussing today and just do some further brief introductions of myself, Carrick Wealth and Morgan Oxford. So we have worked closely together, helping parents, Nigerian parents, who have the ambition to send their children abroad for overseas education. So in today's topic, we're going to be speaking specifically about an overseas boarding school education. In future sessions, we may discuss specifically university education. We might look specifically at different countries, and we may look at specifically different courses. If you want to send your child abroad for medicine versus, for example, maybe doing a topic where you want to send your child abroad for engineering. So going to be a series of conversations. Sometimes we'll include some guest speakers as well from overseas education institutions as well. So this is the Let's Talk About series, and an inaugural session, as I mentioned, we're going to focus on international boarding schools. So today we want to touch on why consider a boarding school education, perhaps what's the difference between a boarding school education in the UK versus the US versus, for example, Canada. Some of the kind of common questions that parents ask our education consultants. Think about what the global trends are for boarding school education at present, and of course, give you some sense of the realistic costs that's associated with an international boarding education, and what financial support, scholarships or financial aid, if any, is applicable. So those are the things that we want to dive into. So just before we get to that, let me just quickly touch again on who I am and my organization. So my name is Dele Adeshina. I've been a private wealth manager or financial advisor for more than 2 decades. When I finished at London School of Economics, I was a graduate trainee at Coutts & Co, and then a private banker with Coutts & Co, which I think is one of the preeminent wealth firms in the UK. In fact, it's often known to be the King and Queen of England's private bank. So I was with them for quite some time, also with the Royal Bank of Canada in the UK, and then latterly I worked for Standard Chartered's private bank, their head office in United Kingdom, but on the West Africa team. So I looked after high net worth and affluent clients in Nigeria and Ghana, for example. I'm now based right here in Lagos, and I'm the managing partner and a shareholder for Carrick Wealth Nigeria. So Carrick Wealth is an independent financial advice company. We've got offices all over Southern Africa, East Africa, Mauritius, and now have physical presence right here in Nigeria. So I have huge privilege and honor to work with individuals who want to be global citizens. They want to consider sending their children abroad for education, such as we're discussing today. They want to be able to retire with dignity and luxury. They want to be able to maintain, preserve, and grow their international purchasing power. So my responsibility and my privilege is to help clients put together sound and sensible financial plans. So today, as I said, let's talk specifically about sending children abroad for boarding school education. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Richard and subsequently Choma to take it from here. Thanks, Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Dele, for that. So as Dele has said, my name is Richard Morgan. I'm the CEO of Morgan Oxford Education. I mean, brief biopsy of me. I mean, I am somebody that started life as a UK solicitor, did a law degree at Nottingham University, and then 15 years into my legal life, decided I wanted to do something completely different, and came into educational recruitment. Started off in the university sector, and then about 10 years ago, concentrated on the school sector. Today we're talking about boarding schools. But I mean, in fact, the company as a whole advise school children and their parents on the next step to take when they leave their school and go on to whatever form of education they decide to do thereafter. Today we're talking about boarding schools. Now, I think that there probably are not many Nigerian families who don't want to send their children abroad. I mean, there's a contradiction here. There are two problems, and they're fighting against each other so far as I can see it. On the one hand, the desire of the Nigerian parent to internationalize their child, starting with education abroad. They want to expose them. They want them to experience life outside of Nigeria, but they want to do it in a controlled manner, and they want ultimately for their child to get the benefits of internationalization and international education. However, unfortunately, pulling against that is the other side of the coin. The prohibitively high cost of education abroad and the fluctuating exchange rate and the economic instability in Nigeria. And these two issues are right now causing real problems for parents who are in a real dilemma. The education standard of the schools in Nigeria is not always the best, let's be honest. I mean, there are some good schools, don't get me wrong, but to send your child abroad is a really, really expensive option. That's setting the tone, if you like, for what we're about to speak about. I'd like now just to go through a few trends in the boarding school market so that you can get a feel for changes in that market over the last 10 years. Undoubtedly, COVID and the Ukraine war have had a massive effect on the global boarding school market. The consequence of those two events has been to almost eliminate, for a time, it's now coming back, the Chinese market in UK, US and Canadian boarding schools, and also the Russian and the Ukrainian market. And these were three of the biggest markets for boarding schools. As a consequence of those things, those markets have momentarily disappeared, and therefore the schools have struggled. And they've reacted to that by coming into new markets. And Nigeria, particularly Nigeria, Africa in general, is seen as a potential new market. And so therefore the boarding schools are very, very keen to do business here. It's an interesting take. I mean, I don't personally believe that the numbers in Nigeria are ever going to get close to the numbers in the three countries that we've talked about, because the sector of Nigerian society that can afford a boarding school education is only, in my opinion, a very small one. But despite that, you've got a lot of boarding schools clamoring for a bit of this market. I mean, that's the first big trend. The second trend, which is kind of also linked to COVID as well, I call it the Gen Z effect, the rise of holistic education. There's an increasing demand coming more from pupils, I would say, than from parents. I mean, pupils are becoming stronger individuals. And if you try now to talk to a 13 or a 14-year-old about where they're going to go to school and which country and what type of school, they've got very, very strong views. And they have to be heard, and they are being heard more and more. And their part in the decision-making process, I would say, has been noticeably on the increase. What matters to them? Well, they're looking at schools that are eco-friendly. They're looking at schools that are technologically on the ball. They're looking at schools that take their mental health and well-being into effect. They're looking for schools where it's not just about academic, it's also about cultural, drama, music and sport. I mean, they want to be well-rounded young men and women. And that has resulted, I think, in a change in the way that some schools are trying to portray themselves as students. Trend number three, technology effect, very, very important. The eco-conscious values of pupils is reflected, I think, in the schools, and also the need for schools to have a niche. All those things, I think, are important. Let's now talk about economic challenges. Economic challenges, well, touched on this a minute ago. Schools are becoming very expensive, particularly perhaps in the UK, where the new Labour government are impacting boarding school education by adding 20% to their fees by making boarding school fees VAT-able as from January the 1st, 2025. Some of these schools are going to take this money and it'll be lost in the school fees, either in total or in part. But for many of them, they can't afford to do that. They're running a business and they've got to be seen to be profitable. The other obvious problems in Nigeria, the exchange rate. The exchange rate has changed massively. I don't have the figures to hand, but I can tell you that 2 years ago, it was 500 naira to the pound. It's now close to 2,300 naira to the pound. Those Nigerian families that have got money in naira only have been severely impacted by that. General economic instability and uncertainty in Nigeria has also not helped matters either. What are the solutions to these things? Well, the solutions come in the form of perhaps seeking good advice, being made aware of the scholarship opportunities that are available, and they are available. They're more common in some countries rather than in others. There are financial aid opportunities available to families that perhaps have less income or less wealth. There are 1 year options, and I mean, up until relatively recently, children might come to the UK as young as 11 years of age. I mean, that's decreasing, sadly. I think from the point of view of the children, I mean, I think it's not good for them, but more parents are deciding to keep their children in Nigeria until IGCSEs have been done. And they're now coming for A-levels. I mean, there's a marked shift in that, and that obviously saves potentially a lot of money, and it means that you can plan for those 2 expensive years. The other option is undoubtedly, I mean, as mentioned really, to stay in Nigeria for slightly longer, and you can plan this either in conjunction with someone like ourselves or in conjunction with someone like Delhi. You work out how much money you've got available to pay the fees, how many years it will cover, and then you make your plan accordingly. But it all comes down to the same thing. It's all about making a plan and then trying to stick to it and trying to be very organized about it. Let's now touch on a comparison of the different markets in which we work. I thought about this last night. I was looking at this question yesterday evening, and it's caused me a little bit of a dilemma. The first obvious thing to say is that boarding schools in the top 3 countries that we're talking about, USA, Canada and the UK, all emanate from the UK. I mean, the UK is where the boarding system started, and the top boarding schools in the USA are all in New England. That can't be coincidence, surely. I mean, the British started education and they took it to the USA, and actually, I mean, I've been to many boarding schools in both the US and Canada and the UK, and I would say that in terms of the basic schooling, the school systems are not dissimilar. You've got schools that are traditional boarding schools, you've got schools that are a bit more open, I'd call them sixth form colleges, where there's a bit more of a laissez-faire approach and children are treated as quasi-university students. And you've also got day schools that have homestay. I mean, they're all different beasts, and they all exist in all 3 of these countries. So I think the actual type of education is not dissimilar. What has the UK got? The UK's got some quirkiness, it's got some character. The US has got some phenomenal schools, absolutely phenomenal schools, and maybe sometimes a bit more modern and on a slightly grander scale. And so I think it depends on what it is you're looking to pay for. The advantages of the UK boarding system, well, academic rigor is the first thing that comes up. I mean, the UK has a phenomenal reputation for producing very well-rounded academic students. I mean, they have a phenomenal reputation for getting entry into some of the top universities in the world. And they've done that successfully for years and years and years. Even the schools that are supposedly not academic houses are still very capable of producing a good number of students that will go to the top 3, 4 or 5 universities in the world. The UK has a global reputation. They also have a very diverse student body, perhaps more diverse than any other country in the world. If you go into a typical UK boarding school, my daughter was at one, and you go into the economics class, you'll be talking about economics with students from China, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and you'll get phenomenally different views. And if the teacher who's running the class is running it in the right way, all those views will come out during the conversations that they will have, and those will then reflect ultimately in the papers that are being produced during the exams and reflect in the results. I mean, the UK has this reputation. The other reputation, of course, which the UK has traditionally called, and I've got to be very careful about being PC here, called the old boy network. Let's call it the old student network now, because I think that's a better terminology. Yeah, people say that when you go to the right school in the UK, the friends that you make during that time are friends that you have for life, and you call upon them at different times in different places, and it benefits you forever. Undoubtedly true. Again, I can only talk about my own experience as a parent here. To some extent, my son went to St Edward's School in Oxford, where he met an incredible bunch of children from incredible backgrounds, and to this day, he's now 30 years of age. Some of them are his best friends and his closest allies. I mean, you can't replace that, in my opinion. The same thing I think exists, by the way, in Canada and the USA, but the UK has a more of a history and a tradition of it, I guess, because it's been doing it for slightly longer. Cultural exposure in the UK, for sure, but I think you also perhaps get that in America and in Canada as well. And in terms of transition to higher education, transition to higher education from the UK system, quite seamless. I think one has to be very aware of the fact that it's not just about the country, it's about the qualification as well. If you want to transit from the UK into the American system, A-levels will do that for you, which is the traditional British qualification, but there are possibly better qualifications that would enable you to do that. There's a qualification called the IB qualification, which you can sit in some British schools and in American schools and in Canadian schools, and it's a more international qualification should you want your son or daughter to go on to study at university level in Canada or the US as opposed to in the UK.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's fair to say that there's obviously diverse options. The UK has lots of advantages, but it depends on the child and the parents' preferences. There are going to be pros and cons whether they're considering the US or Canada. Could I ask you, Richard, to just perhaps introduce Choma again, and for her to touch on some specific common questions that you're often asked as education consultants, some of the concerns perhaps parents often raise and things that they're keen to know, so we can address that for our audience as well today.
No, with pleasure. So so Choma is the admissions manager at Morgan Oxford Education. She sits in Lagos in our office there. Her expertise is in procedures and processes and in visas. And so I happily hand the floor over to Choma right now.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Dele. Of course, we do get a lot of parents asking questions around what should I expect placing my child overseas in a boarding school, and that is where we come in. We come in as experts to assist with that process. I'm just going to go through a few questions that we get oftentimes, and hopefully we can take one or two out of this. So we get questions like, what cost and financial implications need to be considered when planning an international education in the USA, UK, or Canada? Now, you want to look at the age of your child, right? Because depending on the age of your child, we want to decide where is suitable for them. Now, I'm going to take this a step back. The number of children aged 11 to 16 that have been placed overseas have reduced significantly due to the economic factors which have led to the fall of the naira. Now, we all understand this. So one of the ways parents can approach these financial implications is by looking at the appropriate pathway to save costs. Now, so let's look at the foundation program, which could be offered in the UK or US or Canada or wherever. The foundation program will be less expensive than A levels. However, we also want to be conscious of the child's age, because this is actually important, and also their degree of exposure. Now, if they're almost 16 in the UK, they are most likely to go through the A level path or the route, which we encourage. The USA and Canada are faster options. And why is that? Because they could allow the child apply directly. However, in these climes, which is in Africa, we understand that parents are more conscious of the content their children are exposed to at a young age. So the question would then be, do I want my child to be at university at 16, or do I want them to wait a little further till they're about 18? So financial implications would just include where exactly you want your child to be. Do you want them to go directly to university, or do you want them to do A levels or foundations before? And as stated, A levels are usually more expensive than foundation, but foundation takes them a step closer to university and faster. Another question that we get quite often is, I'm considering 3 study destinations for my child, which are the UK, USA, and Canada. Now, what must I be mindful of when choosing a study destination? Okay, so you want to be mindful of the environment and how exposed your child is. Now, if your child is well traveled, then of course you know your child better and where they could flourish. I'm going to refer to the UK in this case, because I know the UK offers traditional boarding schools with pastoral care, where uniforms are implemented, or the environment for a 6th form, which is more open to university lifestyle. Depends on which one is more comfortable for you and your child. Do you want the child to go to a traditional boarding school, or to a 6th form school that is more open and is more like universal lifestyle and no wear uniforms? That's one question you want to ask yourself. Also, the weather. We all know how extreme, how cold, or should I say how extreme weather conditions that you would find in the US, in Canada, and also in the UK as well. But then you also want to look at destination, proximity to home. How far away are you traveling to go see your child? Or do you have family in those countries? Those are things you want to consider when choosing a destination. Another question we do get often time is, I have a Naira fund for my child's education, but want an international education experience for them. How do I navigate this within a set budget over a 3-year period? I would say start planning early. As a parent, you already know you want your children to study abroad. Start planning early, start looking at the numbers, and see this as a long-term goal, right? Because we know that boarding fees, and I'm talking from a professional point of view right now, boarding fees in the UK range from £32,000 to £60,000. So you want to plan yourself and say, okay, if my child is going in from year 8 or year 9, how much am I paying over a 3-year period until they are done and until they are ready for university? So that's something you should have in mind. And that price is actually without scholarship. So if your child is deserving of a scholarship, either by merit based or needs based or by country based, then the fees could come down to to about £27,000. So it's just something to put in mind. I'm just going to proceed. I don't know, Dele, should I go through all the questions then?
No, let me ask you a question actually, Trevor. So
Okay,
perhaps,
please.
if you had a parent who's with us today, let's say, and perhaps their child is more introverted, perhaps they are more concerned about their child being away from them, and for perhaps parents, I've met clients of mine whose children maybe have some maybe some special educational needs. Just wondered if you had any thoughts. I'll open this to yourself as well, Richard, concerning what things parents should then have in mind if they still want an overseas, under 18 education for their child.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I would say this is a crucial question, because we find a lot of kids that have that personality of being introverted, and we find some who are quite extroverted as well. But it is essential that a professional education consultant as us is involved. Here at Morgan Oxford, during our consultations, we assess the children's skills, their strengths, and of course their weaknesses as well. This would enable us to advise on the appropriate school. Technically, we help the parents make the right choice, right? And as a general principle, we would be recommending small schools, schools where the principal or the headmaster knows each child, so they're able to determine, okay, is this child getting overwhelmed by the environment? What is happening with the child? Has something changed with the child? So you want to actually look at all of this put together, and then just we would make a decision as we go. Perhaps Richard may have one or two things to add to it.
Yeah, all I was going to add to that is it obviously every child is different, and what we try to do is to work with the parents to work out what is in their best interest to know, and also what their budget is. But in your example, I mean, an introverted child probably is going to be better off in a smaller school, a school that you can walk around with the headmaster, which may only have 200 or 300 students in, and where the headmaster knows every child by his first name. I mean, those kind of children tend to do better in that kind of environment. Where you're talking about learning difficulties, I mean, there are different types of learning difficulties, and it really depends on if it's a learning difficulty that is better off being dealt with in the mainstream schools, or if their learning difficulty is such that they should be out of the mainstream and into specialist schools. I mean, we've got access to all of those schools in all three of the countries that I've spoken to. What I would say, without naming names, is that we had a child come to us with his parents about 3 years ago, from recommended by the principal of a Nigerian school, and he'd been counselled by one of our rivals. And what had happened there is that he'd actually paid money, and he'd sat down with this other person and sought his advice. And the child had extreme difficulties and I think something called psychosis, if I remember rightly. And the advice given, I was amazed by this, by the other person, was that they actually recommended a school which was a very mainstream school, and in fact a school that was known to be the school that this person put a lot of children into. And so he kind of basically he'd not tried very hard to do his job. He'd actually gone back to the school that was clearly not best suited to this child at all, and tried to put pressure on them to accept him. We did a lot of work with this child. We involved an educational psychologist. We put an awful lot of effort and time into it. And I have to say, the conclusion that we came to at the end was that in this particular case, it was not in his best interest to go abroad for A-levels. And it was in his best interest to stay in the country, stay with his parents, do A-levels in Nigeria, in Lagos, and then go on to university, hopefully afterwards, when he was in a better position to be able to cope with it. And that's what he's done. And we've kept in touch with that child and his parents. And I have to say, he's now flying. And I love, I love things like that. That makes me very happy when we know that we've given good advice. So I think, Deli, I don't know if it helps you, but I mean, it's all about giving the right advice to the right child and parent, ultimately.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chuma. Just in the interest of time, because I want us to wrap up. You know, we only wanted to cover half an hour today, and as I've said to the audience, we'll be doing lots of sessions like this. You know, keep sending us your questions and things that you'd like us to cover, the topics that are very important to you. But just maybe two final things I'd like to put to you, Richard and Chuma. One would be, again, for maybe with children who have particular sporting ability, or you know, seem to have a lot of talents, you know, global talents of some description. It'd be interested to see what your perspectives are. And then perhaps last but not least, just to touch in a little bit more detail about what financial aid, what scholarships may be available. You know, is it equally available in the UK as opposed to the US, as opposed to Canada, for example? So just those two final things, I'd like us to close with that, and then we can thank everybody and everyone go. Thank you.
You're going to do that, Choma?
Richard, you could okay.
You take one each. So he wants to take.
Yes, I'll take the scholarship one. Richard, you can do this one.
You go for the sporty kids, Richard. What's your tends to be your guidance there?
Well, the sporty kids, the UK is very strong on soccer academies. However, getting scholarships to those soccer academies is quite difficult. we've got some gorgeous schools in the UK, which are top private schools that have one works with the Manchester City Soccer Academy, another with the West Ham Soccer Academy. We've got a school that's linked to the Steven Gerrard Academy in Liverpool. And we have lots of success stories about children that have gone on to become professional footballers as a consequence. But I have to say the scholarship opportunities at those schools are very, very small. They're very much the exception to the rule. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but there are. I also have to say that there are great soccer academies for girls as well as for boys as well. So that's the first thing on sport. The other thing I'd say on sport is that generally the USA is better. I mean, soccer apart, the USA schools do have great scholarship opportunities for elite sportsmen. I can tell you a story of a head teacher from an American boarding school I met at a conference. I think at the time I met him, his number two, his assistant head, was running around Africa trying to apparently find the next super USA basketball player. The American schools will go to immense lengths to get talent. It could be, I mean, basketball is definitely one. Athletics is another one for Nigeria. There are soccer academies in the USA, but as an Englishman, I just question whether or not you should be going to the USA to play football. But that's just a personal opinion. So I think, there are great opportunities for sports scholarships. I personally would be looking more at the US than the UK, but for soccer, maybe the UK is the place to go. Over to you, Chioma.
Thank you, Richard. And yes, indeed. Chioma, do you want to take it away?
Okay, yeah. So just to understand the question, you're looking at scholarships in either of the UK, US, and Canada.
Just generally, what financial aid may be available. I'm sure the days of full scholarships and might not be as frequent as common, but what other strategies and financial aid may be available in addition to scholarships?
Yes, so in cases like this, I encourage parents to leverage on your child's academic performances. If your child is very good, which is what we do here at Morgan Oxford, we always push them to the school and say, listen, this child is good. Would they qualify for a 50% scholarship? Of which most of the time, yes, they have been given that. On some cases, they're giving 40% scholarships. Now, those kind of scholarships are merit-based. Merit-based scholarships are usually looking at, they're awarded based on academic achievements, what has this child achieved in the past, or it could even be based on sports. How good is this child at sport, like Richard rightly said. So we're looking at your child, we want to leverage on those strengths because those could be used to get scholarships. And also needs-based. In some cases, we've also put out applications to let the schools know that this child needs a scholarship, and of course they are being given. And there are other scholarships as well that also fall in different categories, like the International Student Scholarship, and also country-specific or region-specific, like being an African. Africans also have scholarships that they could tap into, only if they're being aware of it. I think during the consultation, it's easier for us to decide, okay, if this child should be going for this or should this child be going for this kind of scholarships. But all of these scholarships are applicable in all three countries, but some stronger than the others. Like Richard said, in the US, you would find more basketball scholarships, and while in the UK, it may likely be more soccer or football scholarships. So it all depends on which country exactly, from the onset of the consultation, and then where we can actually get which scholarships.
I know Dali is going to want to close up in a minute, but it would be worth saying this very, very quickly. The truth is that all the countries, you can call them scholarships, you can call it whatever you want, they are all willing to talk. In the UK at the moment, I would say that there are lots of schools with lots of spare beds, and they will negotiate, but they'll generally negotiate with people like us, not with the general public. And that's one of the reasons why you should be using somebody like us to help you pick the right school. We're aware of the scholarships, and they'll come to us because they don't want to openly advertise the fact that they're selling places cheaply. They want it to be done quietly. So that's quite an important thing to say. I can tell you I've got a Canadian school at the moment that charge 80,000 Canadian dollars that have told us they will give 50% scholarships. One of the best schools in Canada. We have the best boys' school in Canada, the top boys' school in Canada, that has offered us a ridiculous deal for a really talented Nigerian male. And the American schools are probably the ones that have got the best scholarships. So the scholarships are out there, but you've either got to do an awful lot of research yourself or come to somebody like us to be made aware of them. So there are real opportunities, but you've got to look for them. I mean, I had a parent last week. I'm going to say the parent from hell. I don't mean that because she's a lovely, lovely lady, but she was so good in doing her research that by the time she came to me, she'd already found a 75% scholarship in the UK for her very academic son, and I just looked at her and said, well, how can I help you? Because she's kind of done my job already. And it's very difficult for me to work with that kind of person, not because the only reason being that they've done the job that I'm supposed to be doing. but they are there. I mean, it's a question of looking and knowing, and so either coming to us to find them, or alternatively spending hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours doing it yourself.
Great. Well, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chum. So what I've remarked from that is that there is financial support, there is financial aid, there are scholarships available, but also very importantly, some of the schools will not publicize and advertise those, but can, on a one-to-one personalized basis, working with firms such as yourself, make specific offers for pupils. So I'd encourage parents to have conversations with yourself and see what's available. I think the final thing I would mention, of course, is apart from financial support, one has to assume that, look, if I really am passionate about this, if it's very important to me to send my children abroad for an overseas education, then I have to put the funds in place. Now, the best thing would have been to start saving yesterday, if you haven't done already. The next best thing is you start putting something in place today. And I think in that respect, I'd encourage you also to come and have a conversation with me. My office is in Victoria Island. We sit, we help clients plan, look at the realistic financial implications, not just in today's value, but bearing in mind there's inflation as well. We need to think about what it's going to cost moving forwards. So let's sit, have those type of realistic conversations, let's stress test your existing planning, and let's help you make your dreams in that respect a reality. So I think with that, I'm not sure we had any other questions from the audience today. So I think with that, we can probably thank everybody. I'd like to thank my partners in Morgan Oxford Education, Richard and Choma. I will leave just on the screen for everybody contact details, both for Morgan Oxford and of course for myself at Carrick Wealth. And please feel free to reach out. This presentation has been recorded. A copy of the slides can also be collected as well. So reach out to me and I'll share this. And of course, encourage you to be in contact with Morgan Oxford Education. We also have offices right here in Victoria Island. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your days. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.